What up, y'all? This is the Twice Over Movies podcast, and I'm your host, Faraz. Today, we got a special show with a special guest. We are previewing Darren Aronofsky's The Fountain from 2006, starring Rachel Weisz and Hugh Jackman. This film was a listener suggestion, and that listener is Usher from the Bottled Petrichor podcast, and he is going to be joining us and giving his thoughts on the film. If you have any suggestions for us, let us know by hitting us up at the Twice Over on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. While you're there, give us a follow so you're up to date with all of our releases. So here's the spoiler-free preview of The Fountain with myself, Fahad, and Usher. Alright, so Usher, you're our first guest, and we watched a movie based on your suggestion, The Fountain, 2006, directed by one of my favorite directors, and I think one of Fahad's favorites as well.
Yeah, Darren Aronofsky. Right. I got into his films back in 2006 with the movie. What is that movie called? Pi, is it? Or
yeah, so he's done Pi, The Wrestler, Requiem for a Dream, Black Swan. Yeah. Requiem for a Dream is probably my first watching of his, and I love that movie. I love The Wrestler. It's probably one of my favorite movies ever. Black Swan is also great. Pi, I didn't care too much for. And then Mother, Fahad. Do you remember watching Mother?
Mother was an extremely frustrating watch. Most of the time, I didn't know what was going on.
He also did Noah.
He also did Noah.
He did Noah. That was way more accessible.
So obviously, both Fahad and I are familiar with this director. We actually like him generally. And what made you want to suggest this movie?
I went through a phase actually when I was I want to say at some point in undergrad where I just started watching a bunch of movies and I came across The Fountain. I think maybe it was recommended or maybe when I was at the library, because we went to the library to get movies, and that's where I saw this as a DVD, and then I got it and I saw it and it was it was such an awesome movie. I think I was familiar with Requiem for a Dream soundtrack. Which was amazing, and I can't remember. I'm pretty sure it came out before this movie.
Yeah, Requiem was 2000.
Yeah, so I mean, it just kind of like clicked a few buttons, and I'm like, and I remember that, and then I saw that movie, and I thought it was really good, and then I saw Pi, which again, it was an interesting movie. I'm not gonna say it's one of my favorites, but I kind of really liked his artistic style and the depth of his story. So
yeah, and he uses a lot of the same themes, right? He references Christianity, a lot of the iconography kind of like matches, and the music. I think you mentioned it briefly. He used Clint Mansell for both Requiem for a Dream and this movie.
Yeah. He uses him for almost like all of his movies, I think.
Does he? Okay.
Yeah. He's kind of like Nolan and Hans.
That partnership, yeah.
Okay, so for this segment where we preview the movie without any spoilers, we're going to go over our scores. Usher, you can chime in. You said you didn't want to give scores, right?
I don't know.
Okay, cool. So we're going to go over ours. We're going to go element by element of the movie, and you can chime in after we give our take, I guess.
Okay.
So we're going to start with the narrative. So the narrative, of course, consists of the story, the overall direction, the pace, the audience connection, etc. I gave this a 50. What about you, Fahad?
I gave it a 75.
Oh,
so
okay.
You went low, I went with the average. I thought the lack of a traditional plot line in this movie was pretty commendable. It was a bold choice. The movie did flop with audiences and critics, and I wonder if it wouldn't have if the movie had given us a more concrete way to interpret the images we were seeing. But to me, there was always meaning and harmony within the film and the images, and it was a more thematic exploration of a couple of things of love, life, death, and rebirth. And while I think this movie was extremely satisfying with even one viewing, there are a lot of things that get better with multiple viewings. It's like a puzzle that starts fitting more snugly with repeated viewings.
I totally disagree that this is satisfying with one viewing. I also watched this sometime in undergrad. It was a suggestion from Fahad actually to watch it, and I hated it. I was like, this is so bad. Yeah, I hated it. And I also, like when I was rewatching it now this past weekend for this recording, I saw like, whoa, this is only like an hour and 37 minutes. Like I remember it being like one of those 3-hour movies. Like that's how boring it was, that it dragged that much to me that I thought it was a 3-hour movie. I will say this time around, I liked it a lot more. And it was, I guess I knew what to expect this time. Maybe last time I didn't. Maybe I was thinking it was going to be a little more engaging like Requiem was, but This one, my problem with it, I would say, is the engagement level. I think it's a little too abstract, especially for a first viewing. If you're not prepared for that, you're gonna be bored, confused, and like just be like, what's going on, what's happening. It's not particularly entertaining. So that's why I went with a below average score of 50.
Okay.
Usher, you want to add anything to that?
I think I somewhat agree with you in that the first time around when you watch it, it might be a bit cumbersome. It might be a bit too difficult to take in. Again, it's not really a traditional plot. So I can see where you're coming from. But I think I side obviously more towards Fahad in his scoring, and I would score a bit higher, of course. But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I think when you experiment with things like this, you're bound to get some things correct and some things incorrect. And I think with his directing, I think with a movie that's done in this type of way, I think he did pretty well, generally speaking. So
that's fair. I do think the direction itself is not bad. It's really the story that's pushing it so far, like below average for me. Like if it was just looking at the direction, it might be a above average movie, but or at least for the narrative element. But yeah, it's really just the story just being not engaging enough, especially for a first viewing.
Yeah, and then I mean it's a bit confusing because if you're at the story plot, you have three very distinct
timelines, right?
Timelines, things going on. I mean, for your average viewer who's looking just for something very linear, I mean that's gonna kind of add even more because it's not just like three things happening in the same time, which are independent or require some type of reconciliation. It's three things happening in different times with different settings and scenery and imagery. So
there's a lot of things that may or may not be metaphorical, and so you have the viewers tasked with the additional burden of figuring out what's metaphorical, what's actually going on.
Yeah, and I actually have a lot more to say on those three timelines, and we can save that for the discussion because obviously I don't want to get into any spoilers. Sure. Let's go over to the writing score. Here I give it a 60.
I gave it a 75. You want to get into your score?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so again, the writing is a bit abstract. Every line is very deliberate, but it's just not fluid, I guess. It's not very... So unlike a Nolan movie, the exposition is not part of the dialogue, so you don't really get an idea. Like you're filling that in yourself, which is fine. I guess it's just at the very other end of the spectrum here, where it's really asking you to fill in a lot because the lines or the dialogue, while it may be deliberate, is still very abstract. So again, it's all about the state of mind you're going into with this movie. I did think it was okay. Like, I didn't have a huge problem with them. Just think it's a little below average, and I don't like giving points just for being different.
Gotcha. Yeah, I thought I had different views on that. So I liked the refrain from explaining everything, to leave some things to the mystery of to be a mystery within the viewer's head. And when you're referring to some things that there was a line that kept repeating with the future Tommy as he's a space monk, right, traveling through space. It's like finish it, and there's a lot of repetition there. But I can see how some things might be missed because there's definitely a lack of exposition. Why I gave it an average score was actually because the dialogue, it seemed kind of clunky and unnaturalistic in some spots. And
sure, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I think I generally agree with both of you with the writing, and it is a bit clunky. It is a bit abstract, I guess, and it's not always very organic. The types of conversations you'd expect. I think it's hard really because. I'm thinking about some of the conversations they had while they were in the lab, and it is just are those the types of conversations you have in the lab, or is the tension that he has and the way he says and what he says affected by whatever's going on through his life? And in terms of being realistic, I mean, it seems kind of weird. I mean, for me, like when I watch a movie and I see these types of scenes and these types of writings, I mean, I again, you accept fundamentally that it's a movie, it's fiction, but at the same time, it has to kind of hit at something real in your life. I'm kind of just thinking about some of the different dialogue, the different conversations between him and his wife, him and his colleagues, and just between him and himself. And again, it is a bit clunky. It's not as organic. It's not as it's just it's a bit abstract, generally speaking. Sometimes they get it right, but I think it could have used a bit more refinement in the writing. But again, I mean, I still liked it a lot. So
no, yeah, that's good input there. Let's move on to the acting. Here, I give it a 95.
I gave it an 85.
Okay, so I mean, I assume we both agreed that Hugh Jackman was incredible at the role.
Yeah, and so was Rachel Weisz.
Yeah.
The reason why I gave it kind of a lower score was because the writing kind of interfered. So where they had those scenes where it's like pretty intimate and they're talking, some of their performances kind of like faltered, and I chalk it up mostly to the writing, but I guess the actors were also uninspired by those lines. So, yeah.
Honestly, I thought the acting was incredible. That what you just said, I do agree that I noticed it here and there, but not enough to take me away from just the performance.
Yeah, definitely
that I was
not.
watching. So
yeah, I thought performances were all pretty excellent, and it's just like Rachel Weisz and Hugh Jackman, and then a bunch of very minor characters. And it's interesting because this movie, it focuses so much on the characters that at times their faces occupy the entire screen. So it's like we're looking at their whole face, and these micro expressions are coming, and they're crying and stuff, and it's great.
I mean, I feel like that's a very characteristic thing of Darren Aronofsky, because he likes to zoom in on faces, profiles of their faces, like a lot of imagery there too, with I guess like macro shots of the neck of a tree, of hairs, things like that. Usher, you want to add anything?
I honestly, I think the acting was superb. Really, Hugh Jackman's versatility as an actor, and really, shone through in this movie. I mean, you could definitely see that this guy is at once in deep pain, but at the same time, and he doesn't have enough time for pain because he has to do so many other things, and it really came out in his acting. Sometimes I think some of the breaking down scenes were a bit too much. Sometimes.
Are you referencing that scene in his office where he throws the paper?
Yeah, there's that scene in the office, and then when he breaks down in front of the lady, his I think she might be his superior in the lab. Sometimes that was a bit.
Is it just that it's too dramatic?
Yeah, it was a bit too dramatic, but generally speaking, it was very well done, and like it was. I mean, I think that really tied the movie up very well. His acting, her acting, Rachel Weisz's acting, that is.
All right, so let's move on to the themes. Here, I give it a 90.
Here, I give it a 95. Yeah, this movie heavily relied on the themes to kind of carry it through, right? So the story was lack of a traditional story here, and it was mostly the themes kind of carrying us through the three timelines. And it explored, like, what was it? The acceptance of death, immortality, rebirth. And it kind of brought in Christian images and text, and as well as Mayan ideas of death and rebirth, and some Buddhist ones too, right? And a lot of the there were a lot of visual motifs that kind of paralleled and drew connections from one timeline to another, suggesting that there was like a universal message in art.
I'll add to that, so Darren Aronofsky, his movies are very heavy on themes almost all the time. I mean, there's some high-level themes that are really easy to pick up. I think his execution of presenting them is very well done. Like, this is where... So I guess, Usher, how you said the narrative was pretty impressive because of how well the direction was by Darren Aronofsky. I would just say I probably push that more towards the theme, to the themes element, because it's a challenge to come across abstract themes.
Yeah, I guess they're abstract.
Somewhat abstract, right? Like fear, death, determination, regret. Like, these are a couple that I wrote down. And he just executes it really well within the movie. Again, using a lot of imagery, a lot of iconography, and it actually flows pretty well between the three different timelines that we mentioned earlier.
The timelines, visually they transition extremely seamlessly, and it's through these like visual motifs and some of the same iconography. Yeah, it's interesting.
I mean, I don't want to spend too much time repeating and what you guys said, and it's exactly, it kind of hits upon it, right? You have these biblical themes, you have these notions of of death and rebirth, and there's also hubris, stuff like this that kind of really stands out in the movie, and I think he touched upon all of that very, very well. So I'll just leave it at that.
For sure. All right, last element here. We're looking at aesthetics. I gave this 100.
I gave it a 95. I resisted the impulse to give it 100. All right. I guess we can break it down into cinematography and music.
Yeah, really, it's just those two.
Yeah. Did you give each a separate score? Did you break it down?
Not really.
Okay.
I combined it together. I mean, it's really the combination, or how well it works with one another. And I thought it was I mean, it's as good as any movie I've ever seen. So it's 100 from me, right?
Yeah.
I just feel like this is one of those movies where it's heavily relying on the aesthetics to get the viewer immersed into the movie, because like I said, the story is not going to do it on its own. Again, I do think you still need to be in kind of a state of mind to approach the movie, but the aesthetics can play that role of getting you into that state of mind, because the visuals they're different, they're unique, and they're purposeful. Like, they're super purposeful. Mm-hmm. Everything is there for a reason, and the music plays in very well.
The music's great. It's somber when it needs to be, and then it breaks out into this loud emotional piece when it needs to.
It captures sensation very well.
Yeah. It captures, like, I guess, realization, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And development. A couple of things I wanted to mention. So much of the framing of this movie, it's very symmetrical, and the camera is always stationary, and it centers on the object of interest, whether it's a person or it's focusing on like bark or something that's of interest. To me, it's just that camera work, it just provides a lot of focus on like what the audience should be paying attention to, because as this movie like tries to develop on its themes and the ideas on which it tries to explore, that's important, right? And so it's important for the camera to kind of stay focused and not move too much. So I noticed that a lot.
Like I mentioned before, the shots that we have in the movie of super macro shots, close up, like, of people's mouths, of objects. And like you said, they're always centered on screen. They're never off center. His use of focus, like very shallow depth of field shots. So like he really wants you to focus on one specific thing at a time. Mm-hmm. And then you have the total opposite as well, where you have this very wide angle shot of this very grand scene, and you're seeing everything in focus at once, and you're just trying to capture it all at once. So yeah, it's really something on the aesthetics here.
Yeah.
Usher, want to add anything?
No, I don't. I know you guys have to limit it to a certain amount, and I agree fundamentally with everything you have been saying. So.
All right. So yeah, that's our scores. Spoiler-free preview. We like this movie quite a bit, especially for its acting, its themes, and its aesthetics. Fahad is generally okay with the narrative and writing, and as is Usher, obviously. I feel like those are the weak points for the movie. And if you're in the mood for a entertaining, good story movie, you might not want to watch it. But if you're ready for a movie with incredible themes, incredible acting, and very immersive aesthetics, then this is the movie that you got to watch.
Thanks for listening to this production of The Twice Over. If you haven't already, subscribe and follow wherever you get your podcast. And remember to support us on Patreon or by sharing the podcast with a friend. Feel free to contact us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at The Twice Over, or email us at comments@thetwiceover.com. All of the music you heard is from Amerigo Gazaway. Check him out on Bandcamp and Spotify.